My name is Debbie Lou Ludolph, and I am a recent graduate of Martin Luther University College with a Doctor of Philosophy in Human Relationships, the Pastoral Leadership stream. My dissertation is entitled Singing Difference Amid Relational Connectedness, and it's a narrative study of how singing together shapes worldview. I am a white settler, educator and liturgist, middle class, Christian faith by tradition, song enlivener, and lover of walks in the woods and swimming in lakes. I live and work on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Neutral peoples. I'm the director of the singing community Inshallah, which sings songs of faith from around the world toward peace and justice. The participants for my research all sing in Inshallah. Inshallah has been a place of learning for 14 years for me and has kept me curious and passionate about the community singing space. To inform the focus of this research, I reflected on my own narrative beginnings of singing as a meaning-making experience and Christian faith as a guide to use my gifts towards the healing of the world. I considered the narrative landscapes in which I work and live, Martin Luther University College with its emphasis on public theology and pedagogy of encounter, and the complex multicultural, multi-faith city of Kitchener-Waterloo in the country of Canada. You'll see from this slide that two previous research studies also informed this particular research puzzle. In 2009, an ethnographic study of Inshallah with focus groups confirmed a changed worldview was a potential outcome of singing global song. And in 2013, I conducted a phenomenological study in Israel-Palestine, which yielded themes of meaning-making, social location, otherness, and leadership. This moved me then to ask this next research puzzle. How does the experience of singing together shape worldview? How is it that the imagination is set free or constrained by a singing practice? The literature undergirding this study begins with Walter Brueggemann's claim that a contest of narratives exists in 21st century North American church and society, and Charles Taylor's understanding of social imaginary as being carried in stories shaped by precognitive experience and influenced by practice. I especially draw on Mary Phillips' theological call for in-between space, created by safe haven and the practice of adjacency, and Lee Higgins' theoretical argument for hospitality and boundary walking in community music practice. I pay attention to Helen Phelan's work on the embodied experience of performativity, the oral and affective qualities of singing together, and the multidimensional thickness of meaning-making potential that she and other practical theologians and pastoral musicians suggest. I understand engaging difference and cognitive dissonance through the lens of James Loder's transformational logic. I consider the voices of post-colonial theologians and musicians who point to the untold stories of those who are marginalized or different from the dominant culture. And I build on the argument of Lisa Hess calling for epistemological humility, Catherine Bell proposing redemptive hegemony, and Michael Hahn asserting that singing global song like story is able to move people out of their comfortable structures and into a context where they can be affected and transformed. Aimed at singing practice in a faith-based setting, that is not only community music facilitation, but also pastoral leadership, what emerges from this interdisciplinary literature is the opportunity to attend to theology and theory, but not be constrained by disciplinary borders. For this study, I chose narrative inquiry as a qualitative methodology because it gave me the opportunity to think about the experience of singing together as a storied phenomenon. Rooted in the work of Jean Clendenin, Canadian researcher, narrative inquiry is attentive to time, relations, and place, and acknowledges that the stories told and then reconstructed are shaped consciously and unconsciously by both the researcher and participants. Because narrative inquiry doesn't seek objective truth, but rather focuses on the particularity of stories to gain understanding and consider best practice, this paradigm was well suited to my research. I used a purposive sample of 16 diverse participants from Inshallah who participated in individual 90-minute conversations based around the research puzzle. I transcribed the conversations and reduced them to narrative accounts, which were checked with the participants and then served as the research data. In this process, I was aware of the constant interpretive choices I was making, which emphasized that the goal of narrative inquiry is not certitude, but thinking with stories. To analyze the data, I was guided by Catherine Kohler-Reisman's research on narrative thematic analysis. I used this method to analyze each narrative account and create what I called melodic motifs, and then to find resonant threads across the narrative accounts. Examining each narrative account with narrative thematic analysis revealed the particularity of the stories with which the singing experience interacts. Themes began to emerge within each story. No two stories were alike. The stories caused me to puzzle further regarding certainties, assumptions, vulnerability, spirituality, limits, hospitality, difference, and the process of becoming. Applying a second layer of thematic analysis across accounts revealed 5 resonant threads common to each narrative account. My findings included storied songs, meaning the texts and the music of the songs as one would expect, but also an emphasis on the stories that connect the song to its original context and the local context of the singers, to current realities in the world, and to individual singers' lives. Breath of the sacred, the presence of the agency of the divine while singing together, which was expressed in multiple ways. Harmony of hospitality. This is singing together as a welcoming practice that embodies acceptance, values diversity, and shares leadership. Counterpoint of difference. Dissonance that comes from encountering difference at the boundaries of social imaginary, which reveals embedded assumptions and disrupts certainty. And rhythm for life, the singing experience as practicing a way of life and performing worldview in everyday life. It was the interaction of these 5 themes that created an in-between space with the potential to embrace paradox, heal woundedness, listen deeply, and question boundaries. What surprised me out of the analysis was that the stories led me to think of the research puzzle not only through a lens of interconnectedness, but through the lens of difference. In each account, at the boundaries of identity and difference, there was a two-ness, welcome and acceptance, which nurtured vulnerability and courage, and cognitive dissonance or emotional discomfort, which in the long run nurtured tenacity and vitality without promising outcomes. Each of these boundaries were particular to each participant. They included boundaries around Indigenous settler relations, racial identities, religious faith, age, ability, sexual orientation, gender, and mental health. One factor I pondered as a result of this study is that the findings reflect music's own terms, that is, making space for a relational, experiential way of knowing that combines mind, body, and heart. The relational bias of this way of knowing is found in characteristics of the singing experience, the oral encounter, affective depth, embodiment, thickness, and performativity. The surprise for me was that these characteristics inspired trust in the process, and this allowed the singers to often risk being open-hearted to cognitive dissonance and to ambiguity. All of this is to say that the first response to the research puzzle, as revealed by the literature set next to the findings, is that singing in community by its very act, in its own experiential and relational way, shapes the social imaginary and becomes an ally to an intention of singing into relational connectedness. One singer suggests, and I quote, "I give myself fully to the singing activity, and together with the vibrations of others and the presence of God, the music creates what I become." If singing's bias toward interconnectedness is built into the act of singing together, in this study, it is experience of difference in people, stories, and ideas, along with the constant affirmation of relational connectedness, that creates the necessary dialectic to engage dissonance and excite the imaginative process. In each narrative, there was an express need for safe haven and an experience of adjacency, what I call relational connectedness and engaging difference, both and, not one or the other. This creates the in-between singing space. Relational connectedness represents how song, spirituality, and singing practice intentionally aim to embody and sustain hospitality. Engaging difference represents difference as a necessary resource, which expresses a commitment to crossing boundaries of race, religion, gender, culture, age, ability, economics, any boundary that appears. In this way, by singing diverse songs, engaging leaders from marginalized communities, and deep listening to the stories, the singer opens to encounters with dissonance and facing embedded assumptions in the safety of the relational connectedness that participants suggest singing together can provide. This research affirms Lisa Hess's proposal that singing together allows us to hold dissonance gently, and James Loder's description of how the process of transformation happens over time. However, it also points to the need for a singing practice to welcome difference intentionally for the sake of reforming what hospitality means, and for making space for the healthy tensions necessary to stir the imagination. Giving weight to difference adds to the important conversation of recent scholars attending to embedded racialized and colonial frameworks, as well as those nurturing interfaith dialogue. Songs and stories hold the potential to offer both hospitality and disruption. This is the vitality of an in-between space. Significantly, for these participants, the invitation to orient the practice toward the sacred offered an ongoing openness to wholeness, both within oneself and towards others. It also called singers to compassionate justice when new insights arose regarding injustice. Through the analysis of this study, the resonant threads then take on specific readings. Storied songs become boundary crossers. The breath of the sacred offers a horizon of wholeness. The harmony of hospitality focuses on welcoming difference. The counterpoint of difference is a necessary disruption. And the rhythm of life emphasizes performing a worldview of connectedness in everyday life. An aspect of this study to be further researched is shared leadership practice. The participants highlight the need to model the potential for ongoing transformation by enacting social justice in the singing practice. This study suggests Catherine Bell's idea of redemptive hegemony, which critiques the use of power in practice, is possible when leadership is shared with missing and marginalized voices. Transformative in-between space emerges when intentional, critical, contextual preparation explores the limits of the leader and the community's openness to the experience of others. This study identifies that horizontal leadership will model what it seeks: deep listening, openness to the sacred, courage and vulnerability to welcome difference, as well as a willingness to unknow and not know as difference is engaged. Horizontal leaders leave room for ambiguity and paradox without needing to resolve difference, and this creates tenacity and vitality, which potentially widens the vision for the well-being of all. Through the interwoven threads that emerged in this study, the subversive agency of singing together is obvious. The both and of relational connectedness and engaging difference creates a lively in-between singing space that negotiates and performs identity, relationships, and vision, shaping the social imaginary. The narratives of this study suggest the potential of the in-between singing space includes the self being known anew as sacred, accepted, and empowered, resulting in awakened authenticity. Others being known anew as sacred and accepted, allowing for paradox and resulting in deepened connectivity. And within a frame that constantly honors the sacred call to interconnectedness, a vision of wholeness leads to an inspired sense of being co-creators of compassionate justice, resulting in emboldened solidarity. More than conclusive outcomes, however, the stories reflect lived experiences that exhibit how the in-between singing space practices being attentive to life's complexity and possibility by not being afraid of difference, expecting disruption, and taking the risk of being open-hearted and vulnerable. Cracks in worldview frames come in different ways. We all have embedded assumptions. But what is common for these participants is that singing together inspires rather than generates absolutes, invites rather than demands action, and creates an in-between space for growth and disrupting givens that shapes the social imaginary and models a way of being in the world. To review, singing storied songs together from a horizon of wholeness with a commitment to hospitality and difference subversively enlivens the imagination by negotiating and performing identity, relationships, and vision. Narrative inquiry begins and ends in the storied lives of the people involved. There are many possibilities for further research. With Inshallah, alternate methodologies exploring the same question would lend new understandings. I'm also curious about how the worldview of the participants has changed over the past 3 years. What is the experience of those who have left Inshallah because of difference? And I'm interested in the experience of singers during the pandemic when we've not been allowed to sing together. A further question that interests me is how singing together might support our relationship with the Earth community. However, this study also encourages me to examine critical consciousness and community music practices, specifically in congregational song settings, asking a similar question as this study, or interviewing clergy with this question. It would be interesting to partner with a researcher to do comparative studies with singing groups of those who are marginalized asking worldview questions. I'd be interested to explore an orientation to the sacred within community music settings, and to develop research using the ideas of shared leadership that disrupt power relations. To conclude, it's been a privilege to study the storied lives of Inshallah singers and to understand with more particularity and depth how the experience of singing together is composing the stories we live by. By opening to the in-between singing space, we sing into this process of becoming together.